So hello everyone. Like I said, Lee Harper with an enterprise administrator with Terracon Consultants, and you might be asking, what is an enterprise administrator? And well, that's what you call a network engineer when you work at an engineering firm. So go ahead and kind of go over this pretty quick, a lot to cover. Talk a little bit about Terracon so you understand the environment we're working in. The strategy we use to adopt our network automation system, and then the consequences as far as the security side of things. And then where we're headed next. So Terracon is an engineering consulting firm and nothing to do with IT. They have a bunch of different lines of service, testing, concrete testing, asphalt, all kinds of things like that. We've got locations throughout the continental United States, and our growth strategy has mostly been around mergers and acquisitions. And the reason that's important is that was one of the drivers for the need for network automation. Because when you grow through acquisitions, you grow in jumps. And so we would go and we'd acquire a new company, and suddenly we'd have 5 new locations to onboard. So we started with automation in 2019, and that's when we brought Gluware into production. At that time, Terracon had over 120 locations, and our network stack was a pretty traditional stack, router, firewall, WAN optimizer, switches, and this was all connected via MPLS back to our Kansas City data center. Our team was 4 members. And with that number of locations, we were pretty much fully loaded. There wasn't a lot of extra time for us to do anything, and that was kind of where we were at and why we decided we needed network automation, because there wasn't a desire to add a lot more headcount. So you're probably familiar, whenever you bring on a new software platform, there's a lot of commitment to that, a lot of time and resources that you have to allocate. And as I said, we didn't really have a lot of resources to allocate. And so we had to come up with a strategy that would let us onboard our automation system with the resources we had. And so we looked at, the snowball theory, kind of the same as with paying off your credit. And the idea was that we would start with very critical projects and low-hanging fruit, things that could be implemented quickly, easily, and produce results right away. And this would help us to also show the value of the automation to upper management so that we could get their buy-in, continue to get their buy-in, so that we would get budget approval continuing. And so as you implement these low-hanging fruit, the resources that you were putting into doing these projects, those resources are freed up, and then you have those resources to implement the next more demanding aspect of your automation. And like a snowball rolling downhill, your project grows and your resources grow. So where we started with inventory management. And this was, basic module in Gluware, so it was a really easy implementation for us. It took us about a month to do our inventory management onboarding. Most of that was us having to go out to various pieces of hardware and adjust ACLs, make sure they had appropriate credentials so that Gluware could access the equipment. From there, we started looking at the configuration side of things and trying to standardize some of our configuration. So at that point in time, configuration change would take a lot of time. We'd have to go out and touch all the different pieces of equipment. And so we started with just static configuration, things that were pretty much a standard line across all the different platforms, DNS servers, NTP, things like that didn't really change. You set it up once, and then it's more about just staging the equipment. But one thing we ran into pretty quick was that we needed to handle the OS side of things too. What we found was across our environment, we had who knows how many different versions of OS on the same hardware platform. And this was because at the time, we would generally get a new piece of equipment, we would put the recommended version of OS on it, ship it to the site, and that's what that equipment would run until it was retired. And so with the different OS versions, we had problems with syntax changes between versions, features that were implemented later that we wanted to use that older versions didn't support. And so what we had to do was we had to jump from the config side to going to the OS. And we had to settle on a single OS version and push that out. And that took us 3 to 4 months to implement. And a lot of that was testing the upgrade procedure from all the different versions of OS. One thing we couldn't do, because with all these remote sites, we didn't have people on hand. And so one thing that we could not suffer was an upgrade failure taking the office offline. So there was a lot of testing there. And then once we had that OS problem solved, we had everything standardized, then we could go back to configuration and work on that. And one thing that was very important to standardizing this all across was the variable management. We found that you had to have good variable management to handle all of the differences between the various sites. And that was something that we struggled with a bit to begin with. And I would say that is something that Gluware really does handle well. That helped us a lot was their site variable management and how that's tied into the config. It would have been a lot more difficult for us to do the configuration management without those features. So the results, we had everything on our network. We had it brought in. We knew everything that was attached. We knew the versions of firmware on it. We knew versions of the hardware, everything. We had standardized on a single OS version for every platform. And our configuration changes had gone from taking the entire network team 3 to 4 days to implement to taking a single person 3 to 4 hours. So a huge return on investment there. And that was just the beginning of this. So where we're at today, phase 2, is maintaining that network. And this is really where the security side starts to shine through. And so the things we're using now, we have config drift for checking configuration changes. We have configuration and live state audits for for checking against benchmarks and attestation. And then just using all those tools to eliminate and proactively prevent security problems. So configuration drift, like I said, the main thing there is validating configuration changes. And this is important for one thing we found was just making sure that people aren't fat-fingering configuration changes when they're doing a manual change, and also making sure that validating OS update changes. You update your OS version and there's a syntax change, or it totally changed your config for whatever reason. Being able to do that config drift audit after the OS update has helped us really improve our speed with OS, and it's also given our upper management a lot of sense of peace with us updating OS, because now there's a lot more safety around OS updates. And then the other thing that we've run into that having a central system like this has helped is third-party managed systems, like our SD-WAN environment now. We found that updates with that, there were a lot of changes that weren't well documented, and we had run into problems where we'd push out an update and suddenly we had a bunch of broken offices. And being able to do the update in the lab first and then do this configuration drift and see what actually changed has saved us a number of times from potentially catastrophic effects of undocumented changes. The other thing I mentioned, configuration audit. And this is especially important to the security side. So what this lets us do is we can write rules around security benchmarks. Like this here is the CIS benchmark we're using for our Juniper switch stack. And it lets us write rules so that we know that our code is following best practice, or potentially for like the payment card industry, you're following law. And we can automate the checks on this so that we make sure that not only is our code doing it, it continuously is meeting those benchmarks, meeting those best practices. And the other part of this is it's an easy tool for attesting to that compliance, because that is one thing we ran into when we first started looking at doing security benchmarks, is how do we validate that we're doing it? Most of the tools we looked at, maybe half of the benchmarks were automated, everything else was a manual process. And the time investment there was just not appetizing. And then the other tool we use, live state audit. This is similar to the configuration audit, except this is connecting to the device as it's running. And the importance of this is it allows us to check hardware status for potentially for systems that don't have good reporting. Again, SD-WAN. And also allows us to check for bugs that we have found, or reported vulnerabilities around a service. Because you can go out with this and you can check, is the service even running? Or the other side of that, when the service should be running, is it running? So being able to check for that live against your hardware, or being able to just write a real quick check, a new vulnerability came out, being able to write a real quick check to run against all of your all of the affected hardware and check, does our configuration, is it even affected by this new vulnerability? So very handy tool there. Now, how does this all play into the security side of things? So the first part is discovery. Having everything in your inventory and being able to do the config drift, being able to do your configuration audits, lets you find out if you even have vulnerabilities. Saves you a lot of time chasing down vulnerabilities that don't even affect you. So discovery is a critical aspect of this. The next part is remediation. Having those configuration templates and being able to push out, when you have unauthorized changes, being able to push out your template again, put everything back the way it should be. That's very important, very quick fix. The other part is when a new vulnerability comes out and you need to adjust your code, you just go into your template, make the change necessary, push it all out again, and you're fixed. So the speed of response with the automation behind it is totally completely different. And then the other part is the reporting side of things. And anyone that's in a heavily regulated industry probably knows if it's not documented, you aren't doing it. And so being able to report on all of your vulnerability remediation, all of your benchmarks, all those efforts, being able to put out a report that says, yes, we are doing it, yes, we are compliant, is another very critical tool. So phase 2 results. As of now, Terracon has grown over 50%. We have over 200 locations now, and we have not increased the number of team members. We have totally reworked our network structure. We went from the old system with MPLS. We now have SD-WAN, and we replaced the switch infrastructure. We totally switched to a different platform. And again, all of this without increasing headcount. We, for the vulnerabilities, as far as a countable number, so one we like to use is with our cybersecurity insurer and the annual audit we do with them. So we went from over 34 findings with them to 9 in the space of 2 years. And right now, we're one of their favorite customers because we're not a risk for them. And again, the time savings and speed of response is another huge result from all this. You know, we're able to roll out new firmware to patch for vulnerability in a single night. Configuration change likewise, a couple of hours. And I will say a big part of the time commitment in that now is the validation after the change. Making sure everything changed as expected, making sure everything is online and working. And then being able to check and make sure, you know, that, again, everything is as expected. Having those automated drift checks, those automated audits going so that it's not something that you're manually having to do. So where are we headed next? API integrations is the main thing we're looking at. And this is, again, around those third-party platforms. We're looking at being able to tie into the API for our SD-WAN system. We use Palo for our firewalls, and we'll run that through Panorama. Potentially being able to tie into APIs there. And also being able to tie Gluware into our ticketing system for automated ticket generation and response. And then the other part is workflow automation. So there's still a lot of manual processes involved in kicking off the automated aspects. So we don't have a lot of processes around automatic template deployment, just because there's changes that need a human validation to see if you actually want that change made or not. And so that's something we're working on, is figuring out how exactly to automate that side of things. And what we're hoping to get out of all this. Tying everything into the automation system, all these third-party systems as well, gives us a central point of change and hopefully eliminates more human error. Because that's one of the biggest issues with network work is the human error aspect of things. And when you take it down to a single point of change, well, they only have one chance to make that error. Hopefully they're double checking that at least. The other side is quicker incident response by tying it into the ticketing system so that we can generate a ticket that way. That comes in, we respond to the ticket. Potentially that'll kick off an automated workflow, so there isn't even a human response around that. And then communication between teams. So right now everything is, again, manual. Systems, once a network change around something they're doing with servers, they have to tell us, they have to open a change request, all this. If we're tied into the ticketing system, potentially they'll be able to just open a ticket. That comes to us, we do the necessary change. The ticket automatically updates, goes back to them. So better communication, faster communication. You're not waiting on people to remember to email someone or remember to message someone. And then the last part is bringing in fringe systems. One thing we're looking at doing is updating ACLs in Azure and being able to automatically update the public IPs of all of our various offices in the Azure ACL. And being able to automate all that, again, increase speed of response, reduce human error, and just generally better system. So the things we found with all this was we didn't go into this thinking of automation as a security tool. We went into this trying to free up resources without spending a bunch more money on potentially an employee that would or would not work out. But then as we got it going, as we got the automation working, we found that our posture for security greatly improved because of our response time. And we were able to respond much more quickly to firmware, to OS bugs, to config changes, all of that without increasing headcount, and just generally, it was a great result, totally unexpected. So that was kind of the security side of things. Was automation just made the security easier. Any questions?
Right here. You'll be second. Okay. Cheers, Scott. The question's not fully formed yet, but your final punchline there, if you spend too much time thinking about it, you never get it done. Great, sort of embrace the ethic, but it's kind of contrary to Claudia's keynote remarks, right, on design-driven automation of that. So if you've got a response to that below.
Yeah, and the biggest issue is if you're constantly designing it and never implementing it, what's the point of designing it? You have to actually put things into effect for the automation to work. And that's part of selling it to the upper management, selling it to the business, is actually implementing some of the aspects of it. Even if it's not a full automation system yet, at least being able to pick up a few items and show that yes, automation will have benefits, and they will have benefits to the business, potentially beyond just helping the network team. Like I said, we had the security side, the security side of things. And I guess one thing I didn't mention was, with the security things, there are contracts that we as an engineering firm have been able to win because of our security posture. A lot of our clients are concerned with how we treat their data. How secure is it when it's on our network? And so if you're just designing it and you're just looking at how do we work with the network team and not considering the business as a whole, and how do you get this sold, how do you get started, then are you ever going to get started?
Good response, but a quick follow-up if you're allowed then. If that being the case, do you envisage as you move in an ad hoc way that you'll end up in some refactor scenario 2 or 3 years down the line and you'll sort of reimagine things from the beginning to align with Claudia's vision? Yeah.
And it's definitely possible that you may have to go back and rework something, but with a good tool, that shouldn't be a huge issue because you're still laying the groundwork for being able to implement your system. And that's, one of the things we have really liked with Gluware has been that it is very adaptable. Like I said, we totally reworked our network structure entirely. And had we not had a system like Gluware, where we would have had to go in and totally redesign our scripts, we probably would not have looked at that. I mean, replacing your entire switch platform, that's a pretty heavy task if you have to go and redesign all your scripts and everything around your automation. So I think that's one thing to think of when you're looking at designing your automation is how much are you tying it, how narrowly are you tying it to your current system? Always think of the what ifs. What if we have to totally change our routing structure? And try and think about that and make it so that your automation system is modular, is easily adjustable.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I'm here. Hello.
Oh.
Yeah, so with the automation of the OS upgrade, right, it's potentially disruptive event. How did you ensure that when you're rebooting devices after uploading a new image that you are not cutting the access for the devices that are behind this, core switches, for example, right? So you upgrade core switches, you may lose access to the devices which are behind it, right, on the LAN side. So did you implement some logic to put the guardrails, that you're first upgrading zone A and then zone B, or is it just that you are rebooting everything at the same time?
So yeah, as far as handling, and this is kind of the configuration upgrades too, yeah, we definitely don't go whole hog all at once. And we do have a lab environment, so OS upgrades, configuration changes, all that is tested in the lab first to make sure that it's safe. But then, yeah, there is we definitely break it up into groups. Usually we use time zones, where we're spread out across the US, we're across 4 different time zones. And that kind of works with the company's views on downtime as well. Basically, we're not allowed to do any changes until after 7 p.m. local time. And so we can start rolling out changes East Coast and then move on, Central and Mountain West. And if there's anything that shows up, worst case, it's going to show up in that first group of offices. But again, like I said, we do test everything in a lab environment first. I think that's critical, and that's part of standardizing your environment as much as possible so that your lab environment does reflect your production environment, so that if there is an error, you will find it in the lab.
Thank you.
Hello. The vulnerability use case seems pretty straightforward. Do you see other opportunities to bring automation into the security sector?
Definitely. Like I said, right now there is still a very much manual process involved there just because, sometimes there's changes that are being manually made that need to be made. And so that's the part we're trying to figure out on the automation side is how much do we want to be automatically reverted and how much do we want to be left out there to allow for manual changes. But there's definitely the potential to say, okay, this portion of the configuration on these devices should be static. It should never change. And then having that part automated so that if for whatever reason someone does change that, that's caught and automatically reverted before there is an actual, security event.
Hi, sorry, here. In the middle.
In the way back.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for the talk. I'm curious, on the phase 3, you said that there's a human aspects of kicking off the automation, something you're planning to work on. So I'm wondering, are you able to briefly elaborate how you're planning to do that? This interests me because something similar, we are also working on a solution. So I'm just wondering if you're able to briefly elaborate on that. Thank you.
So that's a newer feature that Gluware has added that we're actually looking at implementing, and that's I believe it's tied into their Network RPA module, and it's an object-oriented programming kind of, but you can tie that into SNMP traps or log messages and key your automated workflows off of those messages coming from the devices. And so that's what we're looking at implementing is, you have a log message come in that a change has been made to the config. That will key a configuration drift capture or configuration audit capture, rather. And then the configuration audit, if it, you would have to write, and what we're looking at is you'd have to write a configuration audit around the portion of your configuration you want to be automatically remediated. And if that audit finds a change, then it would kick off the workflow that sends out the template to that device. And that template would just revert those changes. So again, Gluware has a good system provided to us to do that. It would be a little bit more difficult to write that yourself, I'm sure. But that would be the basic steps: is key off of some kind of log message or SNMP trap, do an audit to find if the change is one that should be remediated, and then kick off the template push to revert that change.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's show our appreciation.
Thank you.